The Book of Enoch, about the fallen watchers, the human women, the bloodthirsty giants. Should Christians read it?
They ran the Book of Enoch through an artificial intelligence, not a chatbot, a system trained on the handwriting of ancient scribes, built by researchers at 4 universities, published in a peer-reviewed journal. The AI-dated scroll fragments scholars have argued over for 80 years. When the results came back, they did not confirm what academia has been teaching. They dismantled it. Fragments of the Book of Enoch, a text deliberately excluded from the Bible for 1,700 years, are now confirmed 150 years older than anyone accepted. Some are older than the settlement where they were found. The people who stored these scrolls did not write them. They inherited something ancient. But here is why I could not walk away from this. The AI did not just rewrite the dates. It validated a text that contains coordinates, calendar values, and geographic precision that should not exist at the time it was written. I am Tom, and you are watching Spatial Eyes, the Dead Sea Scrolls.
The Book of Enoch might have been the first written account by humans, and could also have been the inspiration for the Book of Genesis.
Problem you may have. Heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Thousands of ancient fragments pulled from caves near the Dead Sea beginning in 1947. They include the oldest known manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible, texts that predate every other surviving copy by 1,000 years in some cases. For decades, the way scholars estimated when each fragment was written came down to one method above all others: handwriting analysis, paleography. One expert would look at the lettering on a scroll and say 3rd century. Another would look at the same scroll and say 1st century. The gap between estimates could stretch 100 years or more, and when 2 world-class scholars disagree by a full century, what you have is not a timeline. It is a guess dressed in academic language. The arguments never fully resolved, and the dating of these texts, the foundation on which the entire history of early Judaism and Christianity is built, stayed frustratingly fuzzy. Then, in June 2025, a peer-reviewed study changed the math entirely. The study published in PLOS1, open access, fully verifiable. The research team spanned 4 countries: University of Groningen, University of Pisa, KU Leuven, University of Southern Denmark. They trained an AI on 24 carbon-dated scroll samples, teaching it to recognize the subtle visual differences in handwriting that accumulate across centuries. The way letter forms shift, the way scribal habits evolve, the microscopic changes in stroke patterns that a human eye might debate but a trained model can measure. Then they fed it 135 more fragments without telling it the dates. It predicted them correctly 85% of the time, tighter than carbon-14 dating in several cases. The method works. That part is not in dispute. A note on the title of this video. The study used advanced machine learning, not quantum computing. The term quantum AI overstates the method. What matters is not the architecture of the system. What matters is what it found. Professor Mladen Popovic, the lead author, described the AI as opening a time machine into the ancient world. Sounds reasonable. A careful statement from a careful scientist. An important discovery. The media coverage cycle lasted 4 days. A handful of articles, a few social media posts. Then the world moved on to the next headline. 4 days for a finding that rewrites 80 years of scholarship. But here is what does not add up. The scroll fragments of the Book of Enoch found at Qumran are now dated to the late 4th century BCE in at least 2 cases. That is the era of Alexander the Great. A full century before the Qumran community even existed. A full century before the people who supposedly authored these texts were believed to have lived. And the researchers themselves wrote, in peer-reviewed language, that their results dismantle unsubstantiated historical suppositions and chronological limitations, and call into question the validity of the default model. I have read a lot of academic papers. Researchers do not use that kind of language lightly. That is not a sentence you write to describe a minor correction. That is a sentence that means the timeline we have been teaching is wrong, not slightly adjusted, wrong, and it gets worse. Several of those Enoch fragments are now dated earlier than the settlement of Qumran itself. The community that lived there, the people who stored these scrolls in jars and sealed them in caves along the cliffs above the Dead Sea, did not write these texts. They collected them. The scrolls were already ancient when that community arrived. These fragments had been circulating for generations before anyone at Qumran touched them. which means the question of authorship, the question scholars have debated for decades, who wrote the Book of Enoch, remains entirely open. The AI did not answer that question. It made it deeper. It pushed the origin of this text further back into a period where we have no names, no known institutions, and no accepted framework for who could have produced what this text contains. The forbidden text.
Only the Ethiopian and Eritrean Orthodox churches recognize it as a holy book.
The Book of Enoch is not a minor footnote in ancient literature. At Qumran, fragments of it were found in greater numbers than nearly any other document in the collection, more copies than most books of the Hebrew Bible itself. The community that stored these scrolls did not treat the Book of Enoch as supplementary reading. They treated it as central, essential, sacred even. Whatever this text meant to them, it mattered enough to preserve in multiple copies. In a library they sealed in jars and hid in caves as if protecting it for someone who would come later. But for 1,700 years, it was removed from the Bible, deliberately excluded, stripped from Christian and Jewish canons across the known world within a roughly 300-year window in the early centuries of the Common Era. Every church council, every theological authority, every tradition that shaped the Bible as we know it, decided this book did not belong. The academic explanation is that it simply was not considered authoritative enough. The most numerous text at Qumran, not considered authoritative. That explanation has always required a certain willingness to not ask the next question. The complete version survived in only one place on the entire planet, Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church kept it in their canon when every other tradition on every other continent let it disappear. They have used it continuously since the 4th century of the Common Era. No gaps, no dark ages for this text in their tradition. It was read aloud in services, copied by hand, generation after generation, for 14 centuries, while the rest of the literate world treated it as if it did not exist. When European scholars first encountered the Ethiopian text in the 18th century, they concluded it was a medieval forgery. Too sophisticated, they said. Too complex, cannot possibly be ancient. They looked at a text that an entire civilization had guarded for over a millennium and decided, with the confidence of men who had never been to Ethiopia, that those people must have been wrong. Then the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. Fragments of the same text confirmed by carbon-14, dating to 200 BCE. What European scholars had confidently called a medieval forgery was already 2,000 years old when they first laid eyes on it. The Ethiopian church had been right the entire time. 14 centuries of faithfulness, vindicated by science in a single discovery. And now the AI is pushing that date back further still. The mountain.
Some people believe the Book of Enoch revealed a lot of secrets that have been kept and still kept secret for centuries. The book goes into a lot of detail about many of the events that were summarized in Genesis 1-6.
Chapter 6 of the Book of Enoch names a specific mountain. 200 beings descend to earth and land on this mountain. They swear an oath on its summit. The mountain has a name. Mount Hermon. Researchers who studied the geometry of ancient sacred sites have noted something about Mount Hermon's position that keeps pulling me back. The mountain sits at approximately 33 degrees north latitude. It sits at approximately 33 degrees east of the Paris meridian. It stands in a region of the ancient world where the most precisely positioned structures on Earth were being built. Those two coordinates are not close to those numbers. They are those numbers, to within a fraction of a degree. Researchers have debated this coordinate pattern for years. It is not proof of deliberate placement. But when an AI confirms this text is far older than we admitted, the question around these coordinates changes. What was once a curiosity becomes something harder to dismiss. Now, I want to take you to the summit. In 1869, British explorer Sir Charles Warren climbed Mount Hermon and documented what he found at the top. At 2,814 meters above sea level, the air is thin enough that your lungs work harder with every step. The wind cuts across the exposed rock without mercy, without pause. There is no tree line this high, no shelter, no natural plateau that invites habitation. The summit is bare stone and sky and cold. And there is no practical reason anyone should have built anything here, but someone did. Yasser Antar sits at the summit, massive hewn stone blocks cut with precision and hauled to an elevation where construction borders on the impossible. assembled into the highest ancient temple ever recorded on the face of the earth. Stand at the base of those walls, and the question is immediate. Every one of these blocks was carried up nearly 3,000 meters of mountain. Every surface was cut and fitted. Every wall was raised against wind that has not stopped blowing since the day it was built. The engineering effort alone speaks to a level of conviction that goes beyond casual worship. Whoever built this believed something about this specific summit enough to attempt what should not have been attempted. Warren brought back a limestone inscription from the site. It sat partially untranslated for decades until scholar George Nicholsburg examined it and compared it directly to 1 Enoch chapter 6 verse 6, the exact passage where 200 beings take an oath on the summit of Hermon before their descent to earth. The inscription reads, "According to the command of the greatest and holy God, those who take an oath proceed from here." Read that again. The words carved into stone on the mountaintop match the words written in the book. Someone did not just name this mountain in a text. Someone climbed to its peak, built a temple where no temple should exist, and carved the oath from the Book of Enoch into the wall. Whoever did that believed this text enough to haul stone to the edge of the sky to honor it. The impossible calendar.
Other versions of the book were found in a cave, popularly known as Cave 4, and with it came more stories.
The Book of Enoch is not one document, it is 5. And one section has fascinated astronomers for 200 years, chapters 72 through 82. The astronomical book, written in Aramaic, preserved in fragments at Qumran, now dated by the AI to the 3rd century BCE or earlier. This is the oldest section of the Book of Enoch, and the one that raises the hardest questions. The academic position describes it as a primitive calendar system, a 364-day solar year divided into 12 gates on the horizon, tracking sunrise and sunset positions. Ancient people watched the sky, borrowed some ideas from Babylon, nothing alarming. But the astronomical book describes something more than passive observation. It contains a method for keeping the calendar aligned with the actual solar year, adding leap periods at specific intervals. One researcher's reconstruction of that intercalation system, published and peer-reviewed, produces an average year length. Here is where the numbers need to land properly, so let me set this up. The Gregorian calendar, the one you are using right now, the one the world runs on, the one that governs your phone, your bank, your flight departures, every scheduled event in modern civilization. It took the Catholic Church 1,500 years of accumulated astronomical observation and mathematical refinement to produce. Centuries of scholars building on the work of prior centuries. Generations of data collected, debated, and corrected. The combined intellectual effort of Western civilization's most advanced institutions, working across more than a millennium, arrived at a solar year of 365.2425 days. That is the number. That is what 15 centuries of effort produced. The reconstruction from the Book of Enoch's intercalation method produces 365.2423 days. Hold that for a moment. Let it register. The difference is 2 ten-thousandths of a day per year. Across 1,000 years, the drift between those two figures would barely amount to a single day. A text dated to the 3rd century BCE, written in Aramaic, preserved in fragments in desert caves, and the calendar system it describes, when reconstructed by modern scholars, lands within striking distance of the most refined calendar in human history. This is based on one proposed reconstruction of the text's intercalation method, not a direct statement in the original text, but a reconstruction of a 3rd century BCE calendar system that approaches the precision of the Gregorian calendar is a question that deserves an answer. The fragments containing this system are now confirmed by peer-reviewed AI analysis to originate from that exact period. In the 3rd century BCE, the most sophisticated astronomical tradition in the known world was Babylonian. They tracked the moon with remarkable accuracy. They predicted eclipses. They recorded planetary cycles across generations of observation, all documented, all acknowledged by modern historians. What they did not produce, what nobody in the 3rd century BCE is officially credited with producing, was a solar calendar system whose reconstruction approaches modern precision. The Babylonians were lunar astronomers. The leap from lunar tracking to a solar year accurate to the 10,000th of a day, is not an incremental improvement. It is a different category of knowledge. The Enoch text produced exactly those values, and the people who wrote it remain unknown. The fragments predate the community that stored them. The calendar system exceeds what any known contemporary civilization is credited with, and the text that contains it was removed from the biblical canon while the community that held it most sacred was still using it. What this changes.
The text James found consists of 5 parts, and each shows a different aspect of Enoch's life, such as his encounters with the Watchers, his trips to heaven, and the end-of-the-world visions he had.
Enoch, the figure this book is named after, lived exactly 365 years according to the text, the number of days in a solar year. Written into the lifespan of the man whose name is on a book that encodes calendar values approaching modern accuracy. That detail may be coincidence, it may be design, but it sits inside a text that also names real geography, encodes real astronomical values, and is now confirmed older than anyone was willing to admit by a study that 4 universities put their names on. Here is why this matters right now. Not in ancient history, right now. The timeline of how Judaism and Christianity formed the sequence of who knew what, who wrote what, who came first, is built on the dating of these manuscripts. Every seminary course, every academic textbook, every documentary about the origins of Western religion relies on a chronological framework that assumes these texts were written at certain dates. If those dates are wrong by 150 years, the entire model shifts. Not slightly, fundamentally. The community that collected the Book of Enoch existed earlier than we thought. The ideas in it, the cosmology, the geography, the astronomical values, were circulating earlier than we thought. And the decision to remove this text from the canon was made by people who had access to documents we now know were more ancient, more numerous, and more precise than the historical record admits. Consider the comparison. When scientists proved that ancient Mesopotamians used multiplication tables 3,700 years ago, earlier than the Greeks, it reshaped how we teach the history of mathematics. Revised textbooks, new frameworks, international coverage that lasted months. The discovery changed the story we tell about where mathematical thinking began, and the academic world embraced it. When an AI proved that Dead Sea Scroll fragments are 150 years older than the academic consensus claimed, pushing some of them to the era of their presumed authors, meaning they may not be copies at all, but originals, meaning the people the tradition attributes them to may have actually written the physical fragments we now hold. The coverage cycle lasted 4 days. 2 scholars said it needs more study, and then silence. That asymmetry is not neutral. It tells you something about which discoveries the system is built to absorb, and which ones it is not. The pattern and the silence. This is where I shift from evidence to interpretation, and I want to mark that line clearly. When I look at this material, the dating study, the coordinates, the inscription, the calendar, I do not see a primitive mythology. I see a system, a document that names real geography at coordinates that align to the fraction of a degree, that encodes astronomical values rivaling modern precision, that someone built the highest temple on Earth to honor. That was confirmed older than the academic framework assumed by a peer-reviewed study spanning 4 universities. And that was deliberately removed from every biblical tradition on Earth within a 300-year window, everywhere except one country that held the line for 14 centuries while the rest of the world moved on. The question is not whether the book is old. The AI settled that. The question is, what was in it that made people uncomfortable? I contacted 3 biblical archaeology institutions for comment on the AI findings. No response. I reached out to 2 Dead Sea Scrolls research centers. Nothing. The Enoch AI study published on June 4th, 2025. CNN covered it. Science Magazine covered it. PLOS1 hosted it with full peer review and public access. Professor Popovich described the results as opening a time machine into the ancient world. The coverage focused on dating methodology, handwriting analysis, historical technique. Not one mainstream outlet asked the question that follows directly from the data. If these fragments are 150 years older than we thought, what does that change about everything built on top of that timeline? The findings were reported, the implications were not. I am not telling you what this means. I am telling you what the public record contains. A text excluded from the Bible for 1,700 years. Fragments now dated older than the community that stored them. Calendar values that rival the precision it took Western civilization 15 centuries to achieve. A mountain named in the text, bearing a temple inscription that matches it word for word. A peer-reviewed discovery that reshapes a 2,000-year timeline, met with 4 days of coverage and no follow-up questions. Every piece of this is documented. Every piece is verifiable, and every piece leads to the same place. What does it mean when a discovery like that lands and nobody asks the next question? When the data is public, the paper is peer-reviewed, and the silence is louder than the finding itself? That is what I cannot stop thinking about.